I'm just going to give a little introduction here. The preservation of vernacular art environments, as we've discussed for the last couple days, poses numerous challenges, one of the most critical being the element of continual change. Exposures to weather, shifts in local demographics, politics, family, and real estate issues are just a few of the many agents of change that impact sites. The documentation and preservation of sites that are still in the process of being created present particularly demanding considerations, including how to preserve something that's alive and growing, that's still being made, and how to respect an artist's freedom while managing a site, and how to structure relationships between artists, nonprofits, and communities. I'm really delighted that this panel brings together major people in the field to discuss the tightropes that they attempt to balance in the ongoing creation of environments and the range of philosophical, documentary, and preservation issues and community relationships that they navigate. An architect recently referred to the Roger Brown Study Collection, where I work, as a formal garden of inorganics. And it occurs to me that an apt description for the Philadelphia's Magic Gardens, Dr. Charles Smith's African American Heritage Museums and Black Veterans Archives, and the Heidelberg Project are all spontaneous gardens of organically assembled materials that are overarching histories and ideas, in case we need another definition. So I'm going to introduce everyone right now so we don't interrupt the flow of things. We're going to roll that way. And then everyone is going to present images and information about their sites, but particularly address questions and issues that are pressing to them today. So Executive Director Emily Smith and artist Isaiah Zagar will discuss fundamental challenges and key elements in their collaboration at Philadelphia's Magic Gardens, or whatever they want to talk about. Artist Dr. Charles Smith, builder of the African American Heritage Museum and Black Veterans Archive in Aurora, Illinois, and in Hammond, Louisiana, and photographer and artist Fred Scruton will describe the challenges of creating and documenting Dr. Smith's work respectfully, or whatever they want to talk about. And Heidelberg Project Executive Director Janine Whitfield, who will discuss the current plan to radically transition the Heidelberg Project from a 30-year artist-based community project into Heidelberg 3.0, an incredibly exciting prospect. And I'm pretty sure she'll talk about that. So here you go. Thank you.
Of course, I have to say, Lisa, thank you. Of course, obviously, we're having such a great time at the Kohler, and we thank everybody for being here with us. So I'm the executive director of Philadelphia's Magic Gardens, and my most hated question that I get, and I have to deal with it every single day, is, what is it? And it's really hard for me to answer beyond trying to describe the fantastic artwork of this gentleman. There is a heart and a spirit and a community that's in our space that I think it's a lot of what draws us to these places and why we're here today. So I don't have a very concise answer, but I do have a video.
One of the first places I visited when I came to Philadelphia was the Magic Gardens, and it instantly became a landmark for me. As I get older, I want to keep the things that I find beautiful or the things that are important to me closer and closer, and the Magic Gardens represents that for me.
For the blind, you don't know something until you touch it. You know, seeing is touching. And for me, the Magic Gardens is all about accessibility because we've worked with the staff to create a touch tour for the blind and visually impaired.
To me, the Magic Gardens represents the freedom of creativity and expression and what could happen when you're truly being yourself. It's more than just a place for really good photos. The Magic Gardens does a lot within the community, and it's really dedicated to the community. So, it's more than just an attraction. It's a staple, it's a pillar.
Magic Garden to me is like self-esteem. What you feel in your heart, what you feel in your soul. You feel like a kid coming out.
Para mí, los Magic Gardens es un refugio donde o sea, me inspiro a hacer arte y también es un sitio donde no me juzgan y siempre he sido bienvenida.
This museum is a different view of art, beauty, and creativity to me.
The Magic Gardens is a celebration of life.
Mysterious, because it's magical and mysterious.
Like an oasis, a refuge.
That has brought community together.
Mágico, magical.
Come and see it for yourself, and you'll be amazed what you see in the Magic Garden.
And a lot of those tiles that you see were made in Mexico by a man named Jorge Wilmot. Does anybody know who Jorge Wilmot is? Fantastic. You see, all of these things are linked together, but we don't really know about who they are and where they come from. For me, it was Clarence Schmidt who came first in all of this. And he didn't have a beard. He didn't have a beard. The way he got the beard was that J. Patrick Lannon, who was the 9th richest man in the world, said, you know, you could really look good in a beard. And that's why he grew a beard. But his beard was a special beard because he tied it with wire. And he slept with the wire on there, and it got more and more big and more wire. He was eccentric. And I take after him because I'm his favored son. And he said to me when I went to visit him after I moved to Philadelphia, he said, Irving, you're copying me in Philadelphia, and I don't like that. But actually, he did like it. And he wanted me to tell you all about him. But his place burnt down, and so did thousands of other of these vernacular architectures. You see, I have the right words, too. Vernacular architecture. But now that the movie has stopped, I think I'll stop.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is going to happen. Don't worry. It's all good.
No, I'm going to be quiet for a while.
No. Obviously, okay, so this is Isaiah Zagar. He needs no introduction. Probably a lot of you are familiar with his work. Philadelphia's Magic Garden, since we can't see the video, is about 3,000 square feet of fully mosaicked, embellished. It's a huge art environment right in the inner city of Philadelphia. So we're right on a really busy, wonderful street called South Street, and we are not in a rural area. We are definitely urban. So our approach to our space is much different and has to be much different than some of these other spaces that are off the beaten track. But Isaiah, beyond the Magic Gardens, has numerous other sites. There's about 215 at this point that we've documented in Philadelphia alone. Yeah. Impressive. So the Magic Gardens is his largest public site, and that's what we're sort of talking about today. And there's a very good fun fact here. Isaiah actually participated in a Kohler residency here 2001, we think, yes, right after September 11th, actually. And there are hundreds of tiles from Kohler in the Magic Garden, so it's really, really cool.
But they're alien tiles because they didn't want me to use them. They're the bottoms of the toilets. They put the toilets on these bats, and they made thousands of bats, but they wouldn't let any of the residents use them but I got to use them because I got to know the people that made the bats.
Yeah, it's true.
But when they discovered it, they said, this can't go on. But it was too late.
Exactly. It's true. And they kicked him out eventually, you know.
They didn't. I left on my own volition.
So the Magic Gardens opened to the public in 2008, so we're sort of a baby space still. Each year we're growing our attendance every single year. This year we'll probably have 155,000 visitors in a very tiny little space. We have 25 staff members at the Magic Gardens. People always get really blown away that it's such a big staff. Every single member of our staff is under the age of 35. And in the last 3 years, we've doubled our attendance and our budget. So a lot of this talk, too, is showing what's capable for some of these spaces and how we've been able to pivot in a really positive direction with some of these projects that we're working on. And we definitely see the Magic Gardens as a work in progress. We do not say that it's a finished space. Isaiah comes in and changes things all the time. We welcome that. We have a team that we work with, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But it's definitely a space that's growing and can change, and we really embrace that, and we're really flexible in our thinking about that. So these are our jobs. Isaiah's job, always, is to be the visionary, always. That's his number one job, and he's really good at it. It's pretty good.
What is a visionary? A visionary is a person that doesn't understand what the hell he or she is doing. Because if they did know what they were doing, they could only reference backwards.
Yeah.
So if they don't know what they're doing, they're always referencing the future.
That's a beautiful thing to say, yeah.
I'm a dictionary.
And so my job as the executive director working with an artist that's alive in a very alive space is to make sure that we can interpret Isaiah's vision and have it digestible for the public. So we have to work always in relationship with each other, and we really parallel one another, and when we butt heads and we get through it. And it's something that I'm here to offer some of the logistics of some of the things that Isaiah might want to do, or some of the projects, get it funded, all that good stuff. And Isaiah's job is the ideas and to do the incredible work that he's doing. And so a lot of it is staying out of Isaiah's way, which is also really fun. You know, and getting in the way too, it's fun too. And that is a little photo of us in Mexico having a good time. He was eating a popsicle. We were in a good mood. So we have numerous challenges in terms of preservation at the Magic Gardens. I've listed them, but some of the biggest ones that we have actually is vandalism, foot traffic. Again, when you have thousands of people walking through the space, that's just a lot of wear and tear on our garden. The weather is freeze-thaw in Philadelphia, so it's pretty extreme at times. In the beginning, years ago, we had we have lots of documentation, but not necessarily organized. Isaiah is an incredible visionary documentarian, but there are not necessarily a lot of order to it, so we didn't have really systematic processes in place to understand a lot of what we had in our space. And for me, as the executive director of a public art space, safety was the number one concern in our space. Our space goes under the ground, it's subterranean, it is built with rebar and concrete and bottles. Over time, when those deteriorate, you are looking at potential safety issues for the visitors. So that was one of the biggest issues that we had. And many of the objects, there are thousands and thousands of objects in the Magic Gardens, made out of wood, made out of glass, made out of metal. I mean, you name it, clay, it's all in there. So we don't have a really straightforward way of dealing with a lot of these objects. And this drawing, so this is Stacy, who is our preservation manager. She's here. She told me not to mention her. And that's her and I in 2011. We had, that's our broomstick. We used to poke at things to see if they were loose. That's how our preservation team started. And we were really cool. Look how cool we looked in it. That's pretty awesome. But one of the things that we had to deal with very early on when we were becoming more and more popular was the safety issue. So we would poke at something and it would be like, ooh, and you can't have people walking through the space if you're afraid a brick is going to fall on their head. So we actually had to remove some pieces of the gardens pretty early on. And that little drawing that you can see below the photo is a drawing that Isaiah made in response to us having to remove some of the stuff. So why don't you, do you want to talk about what that made you feel and your response to that?
Well, to be serious about it, I was very upset when they started to remove everything from the garden. I mean, you start poking, and if you poke a little bit and you feel like you'd poke a little bit more, and I mean, it's very difficult not to get some feedback. And the feedback was falling tiles and or taking away the bottles and the modules that I had made, and it was quite upsetting for a while. But I realized, of course, that they had taken a lot of the responsibility away from me, which I really liked, because I could sleep nights without feeling that somebody could get hurt. So it was a double bind. But they've been doing it for a while, and they've been doing very well. And of course, they did get help from Lisa and Don, and very early on, Lisa and Don came and did a whole study of what we needed to do to preserve the garden. And I think that's about as much as I can say seriously. I'd like to stop and let her go on seriously.
Yeah. Well, that's it in a nutshell in a lot of ways. So in the beginning, our concerns were safety. We had to make decisions based on safety, and that the goal was always then to hopefully build it back up with Isaiah obviously here, but we had to make some pretty dicey decisions in terms of safety of the visitor. But in the last 3 years, so I became the director 3 years ago, and our number one priority when I came in was preservation. To me, obviously, we have a living, working artist. That is such an advantage. It's an unbelievable advantage. It changes your life in 100% positive ways when you're dealing with these kinds of spaces. But without a space, there is no programming, there is no community, there is no jobs for the people that work there. So we could see as it was deteriorating that we wanted to keep it alive and fresh and keep it growing. So we had a little team. They have little T-shirts that say PMG Preservation Team. There they are. And first things first, you always got to train with Isaiah, always. He's alive and working, and he's doing workshops. You can come to Philly and learn his techniques. We got some consultants, so that's Katja McGurk, who's a local tile maker, and she taught us a lot about different kinds of tiles that we could be using in the space. Of course, we had the incredible support of Preservation Services, Inc., which I know you guys are all really familiar with. That's Don in the back, giving some guidance. And that was really crucial. It really pivoted us into the right direction. We started doing really sophisticated documentation of literally almost every single, every single object in the space. So you can see in that little circle on that gateway is that little tile, and then that's then placed into a series of like organized systems, basically. And then that public mural is another project that we started this year where there's 215 public sites beyond the Magic Gardens. So we didn't even know where they were. We didn't know what condition they were in. So this year we've actually documented, we think, most of them. It's hard, but Isaiah is also constantly working, so we're trying to always be running behind Isaiah with a camera most days. But they've done some incredible work. Conducting interviews, obviously that's a huge opportunity for us. Every interview is filmed, photographed, the whole thing, and Isaiah is always available to talk and tell stories. And Julia, his wife, who's in that photo down there, and she's also here, is a huge resource for us. When they get together and they start talking about their memories, it's like one is really bouncing off the other, and you can actually really have a full, beautiful photo of a real picture of what has happened in the past. And it's quite incredible and moving. So they're our teachers. We clean and repair almost every single day. We have one day off on Tuesdays. That's close to the public, but these guys are cleaning and doing crazy work.
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
Because there's a photograph here of them cleaning a sculpture that was made in Mexico, in Oaxaca. And it was ordered especially by me. I gave them a drawing, and I've been doing that for the last 40 years, giving drawings to artists, artisans all over the world where we visit, and that's because of Julia's Eyes Gallery, that we go to various places to buy folk art and buy craft. And if Julia orders a lot of something, then I can always put my little drawing in and get something special for me. And aside from the things that are bought especially for me, many of the ceramic products come broken. And if they come broken, then I get to put them in the garden. So in many ways, we have a compendium, especially of Mexican folk art of the late 20th century and early 21st century. And folk art is disappearing in Mexico and many other countries because the children of folk artists find that they can't make a living from folk art, and they go into computer work or something, IT work. So it's a time warp that we have created because of the broken ceramics from the Eyes Gallery.
Yeah. So again, we always see this space as a work in progress, never as a stagnant site. And always Isaiah is making the aesthetic decisions. But we work in, I'd say, almost perfect harmony. If there's something, for example, we had a little step that went into the gardens. It was one stair. Our visitors with wheelchairs or strollers were not able to get down easily. And I said, Isaiah, would you be open to turning that stair into a ramp? And he said, of course, absolutely. So now we have a beautiful ramp. And those are decisions that we can make together, and we have the luxury of making together because he's here. And it's really quite special, and it keeps the space really fresh. So we're just really gonna quickly go through some of the projects that we've done that might be interesting to you guys. We had some issues with our archways. We have a numerous archways in the Magic Gardens. They don't have keystones in them, so they're very beautiful, but they are often sort of they were on the brink of destabilization, I would say. And so we got some advice, and instead of, I guess, putting up some ironwork that might be sort of bland, we said, okay, well, let's take this as an opportunity to use Isaiah's skills and make something even more beautiful than what we had before. So, you can see here the archway without the ironwork. This is a drawing in the middle of one of Isaiah's designs that he did himself. And then they made it into the iron and installed it. So now the archway is stabilized with this beautiful work. And there's multiple archways like this in the gardens, so you can see. Oh, you haven't seen that yet. Yeah. Ooh. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Okay, I'll go quickly. There's other things that we've done. Additional ironwork, which is also a safety factor. So we've stabilized the structure. And you can see in the middle photo some bars that we're going to end up building up, hopefully, the hallways if Isaiah's into it, with some additional elements so that it gives us more opportunity for growth. We do tile replacement. You can see here in the first photo, actually it says Valis Simpson and Nick Chand, if you guys can see and recognize those names. The tiles had pulled off that wall, and moisture and water was getting behind them. So we had to remove those tiles, but Isaiah just replaced them with ones that he made himself, and then we regrouted that. So that's a huge opportunity for us, and something that we do all the time. And so you can see some of these images of before and after.
There's a lot of nudity in the garden, so
Yeah.
I warn you when you go and visit.
No, you don't get warned.
Oh, no.
We love it. We love the nudity.
You'll love it, too.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can sort of see, and it's modified. We're not trying to make it look exactly the way it looked before. It's in Isaiah's hand. We often will modify things to have maybe a tile that wasn't meant to be outdoors. We will modify that to be an outdoor tile when we replace it, that kind of thing. But we're not trying to have like a perfect vision of what it was. It's still a space that's in movement, so. And this is something Isaiah just touched on. This is actually a better view of that beautiful sculpture that's on top of the archway that Stacy was cleaning. But
That's actually me and my mother.
yeah. And it is, Isaiah sort of touched on this, but the collaborative aspects of the garden is something a lot of people don't understand or realize. And there are thousands and thousands of pieces of folk art that Isaiah and Julia have collected or commissioned over the years. And like he just said, yes, this is an interpretation of him and his mother, or whatever
Whatever I decide at
Yeah.
the moment.
Exactly. And it's an incredible collection of folk art. It's a celebration of folk art. It's absolutely breathtaking when you really take it into account. We've documented the basement of the Magic Gardens in terms of folk art, just folk art objects. The binder is this big, just the basement of the folk artists and the objects in the space. So one of the things that we did just this August, this is a piece that Isaiah commissioned from a folk artist in Mexico named Josefina Aguilar. And this is Isaiah's self-portrait, The Four-Armed Painter.
Notice he's not wearing any clothes.
Yep. And so vandalism, like I mentioned before, is a huge problem. This is something that someone just snapped off during the day and took home with them for, I don't know what reason, but they did. And that's really, I mean, it's devastating, obviously, when you see this. This is a one-of-a-kind piece that was, formed after many, many years of friendship with another family, another folk artist. So this is something that's really tragic when you see it. But then, we knew we were going down to Mexico just a few weeks later, and I said, well, we'll just go back to the family and get another one, and then we can replace it. So that's something that we started to do this August, where we're going back to work with artists that, for example, Irma Blanco is an artist that Isaiah and Julia knew 30 years ago, and she made that incredible, huge sculpture. And we went to her house and found her again, and we commissioned work for her that we can then reinstall into the gardens. It's really, really fun.
It's very strange. I didn't grow any older, and she grew old.
So we worked with dozens of artists down there this August. It was really quite phenomenal, and we purchased a lot of artwork from these families to then put into the space. So these are new pieces. These are additions to the space that that we're just trying. Maybe there are gaps. Maybe someone stole something. Maybe it's broken, and then we just replace with folk art from the same families. And what's beautiful about folk artists is that it is multi-generational. There are some artists that are continuing this practice, and so we see it as a lifeline. If we can continue this conversation with other families and other artists, then we can have a lifeline for the gardens as well. There's color pieces, actually, you're right. See those yellow tiles? Those are big color pieces.
Yeah, those were the
Beautiful.
bases.
They're the
toilets sat on those.
So
Yeah.
so that's
I don't know. I think we're closing off.
Sure.
Can I close off with there are this year there'll be 150,000 people coming to the garden, but there's double that are standing outside and all around and wandering, and there is a possibility that we could. Do you have a couple of $1 million?
Lisa?
Talk to me later.
Yeah.
There is a building right next to us, and it would just take, about 4 million, 5 million, and we could expand the possibility of me having more friends come to visit.
Yeah,
Just letting you know.
We'll send out the collection. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a fundraiser. We're a hard act to follow, baby. But you know what? No, you don't even have to say anything. You just got it going. I can see that.
Well, I'll just interject and say that if Isaiah is a dictionary, Dr. Charles Smith is a Sunday New York Times crossword puzzle. Really, really complex narrative crossword puzzle. And the phrase that you can't step into the same art environment twice is particularly true with Dr. Charles Smith. And I'm just going to scroll through some slides, first of his site in Aurora, Illinois, and then in Hammond, Louisiana, just so you, while he's speaking, you can get a sense for the powerful and soulful complexity of his work, and he will tell you about it.
First and foremost, I'd like to ask the audience to just bow our head a moment and just give a word of prayer for Miss Cola Ruth, because of comforts and things that we desire, that God bless her with the strength in her back again, because we're all uncomfortable when one of us is uncomfortable. So let's just give a word of prayer. Lord, touch in her body, in her mind, in her spirit, and give her the faith that's necessary to maintain the wonder of the great work for which the family has started. In the name of Jesus, amen. Well, I really, like he said, that's a tough act. You're a tough act. But I'll start out with the fact that I started the African American Heritage Museum and Black Veteran Archives in Aurora, Illinois, not because I wanted to build a museum, but because I saw there was a need. And a man once told me, say, anytime you find a need, a mission, or a statement, you're going to either be rich or famous. And one I've tried and the other one don't work. But what I'm saying is the need was within the community for African Americans to know their history, their past, their contributions, as well as defense of this country. And that was completely voided in Aurora, Illinois. And one particular day, what started the project in its sincerity was a young boy from the north side of the area. He came down and he always was late for school. And when I looked out the door, I found out why he was always late. He was playing with the art. He was down by the center of it, playing with the pieces, looking at them and talking with them. And I said, man, you got to go to school. He said, I'm going. And he would never go. And so finally his teacher came down and asked me, he said, well, why he's here when he's supposed to be in school? I said, well, if you really look at it, he is in school. He has an interest in what he's seeing, and he's learning his history by way of asking questions. And that's how it started. And mostly it got involved with a more detailed start when Black History Month came around, and the city of Aurora had no basic information, knowledge, or exhibits of our culture, our history, or our experiences. And so that's when the city and I got involved with dialogue about it. The dialogue didn't come out right because they were sharing with me that the property is a residential property, is not zoned for a museum. And as I shared with them, there will be a museum, because the fight, when it starts, I know it'll go public. And once it go public and the media see it and the people will see it, you have 7 museums here of historical significance of the white contributions and discoveries in America, and nothing about us. The Underground Railroad passed through Aurora, and you have no means of saying anything about that. And that in itself began the fight with tourism. They were using some of my art pieces and pictures to push their program, their project. The Preservation of Historical Society was using them. And I felt in the beginning, well, let them use it so eventually they'll see that the people is coming to the site and that we could eventually come to our senses. But they never did. And something like 20 years later, right now, they still haven't come to their senses. And that's why I said it's a shame, it's sad, and it's a statement that needs to be made about that kind of racism, because it affects the whole body of people, such as everyone here that has an interest in art. How can you deny a man that has done the work of this magnitude? How can you deny the young people the knowledge of their history? And how can you deny the part that I play in economic development and tourism, bringing money to your area, putting people in your beds and in your restaurant, and buying gas here? This is phenomenal, a bad trip. And we dealt with that so until I found out the best answer for that was just keep talking to them white people. Keep talking to them. Those that have a spirit of God, a spirit of decency, they'll rise up. And they did. They rose up in big numbers, such as like here when you see this story and read this story and say, wow, that's not right. And he's still saying it's going on right now. Wow, that's deep. So a letter from you to the city of Aurora asking, say, well, there's a stinging indictment out here about your city, what you're doing and how you've done it, by Dr. Charles Smith. And I hear in April of 2017, you just elected a black mayor. Come on, come on, come on. So with that, the museum moved forward in various areas. The people that have visited there gave rave reviews. They made points about it to contact other people. That's how COLA became involved. But before COLA came, Professor Jim Zanzi of the Chicago Art Institute came. Before Professor Zanzi and the Chicago Art Institute came with Lisa Stone, there was a young man, a white artist, Mike Nolan. Mike Nolan came by one day and left a note on the door, and he said, man, wow, I'm blown away. He said, wow, can I talk to you? Can we meet? And eventually he did come by, and we did meet, and he said, I want to introduce you to a group I'm associated with, and it's called Intuit Art. And I said, well, I'd be glad to meet anyone in the arts that's going someplace. And I met Intuit. And I met the people that's part of Intuit, a great group, a very positive group with a vision. And I enjoyed that. And being around them, I learned places to go, from talking to people, what galleries to look into that address folk art. And I was just learning a great deal of things because, as they say traditionally, there is no school for folk art. You learn by getting burned. You learn by asking questions. You learn by getting cheated. You learn by being disrespected. But at the end, that's your doctoral thesis of that area, because you are the expert in that, and you have all the answers. Nobody's studying that because the answers is within you. And I grew up and I blew up. And in that respect, I got involved with traveling, wanting to know what's going on around the country in terms of art, folk art, and African Americans. That's how I had the distinguished pleasure of meeting the honor of this sister sitting here, Sister Janine and her husband Tyree, what they were doing in Detroit. I won't elaborate on it because that's what her purpose is here, but that's where I share with people. When you get involved with something very serious like education is the process to get the door open and go where you want to go, and that may not be the answer for everybody. Dedication is the key to move from where you are. When you are dedicated, there's nothing can stop you other than that. That's the only way it can stop you, because you're going to get that job done. When you're educated and the money's run out, the Pell Grant run out, and the cost of them books run out, you're going to think about another course. But when you're dedicated, there's nothing going to stop you. And that's why I preach that to the young people, the gang members, those convicted in jail, waiting for sentences, because I minister them out of the ministry of the Word of God, how God can change a life the way He changed mine. I was in Vietnam, and I made a difference in my life by Vietnam, by the experiences I had, the things I saw, the things that I did. That helped culminate all that's within me right now. Even the fact that when you were in Vietnam, as I was, it was nothing but killing, a daily process, killing, picking up bodies, carrying them to the landing zone, sending them home in body bags, and praying to God that each day that you don't have to get on that helicopter in that way. That was sad. That was dangerously serious. And when you think about the Vietnam War, for which I lecture on, because the people don't know about that war. They don't know about it from the black perspective. They know about it from Hollywood and all of that. The only movie or TV act came out close to Vietnam, what it was like, was when Mel Gibson played when we were soldiers, when they jumped inside that area and was overrun by almost 4,000 enemy, and they had to fight their way out. We had to do that same thing at Khe Sanh, Dong Ha, Cam Lo, Phu Bai. We fought, we fought, we fought, we fought. And the same thing is in the kitchen of the issue of us today as Americans. We lost that because no one teach that. Blacks and whites, Mexicans, together, standing on the wall for America, the policies, and that flag that they're talking about today, that they're trying to push down your throat if you don't like what's being said. And me, myself, and other veterans I talk to, is a man, stay out of it. That's civilian mess. That's a distraction. America is great by itself. It don't have to be great again. The only time it was great to me is when the cheese was coming out, you know. And when you get people talking about things that they have never committed themselves to, just like now our country's in a state of bad shape. Puerto Rico can't get food, can't get water. And we're not talking about a small amount of people. We're talking about a lot of people. And that's why I tell artists, put the message in your madness. Make it say something that create a time and place in history and lock it and block it and cover it with cement so that people will know what happened. Because that's why slavery is important to me. Because when I think about the slaves, what they went through, how they lived, and in Angola, this prison in Louisiana, how these three brothers sat 40 years in a cell with no contact with human beings, and them brothers still sitting there just like they're in their right mind. That's unbelievable, unbelievable. And all that is a spirit of that of the slave when he was in the slave ship. And then when they would raise the hatch up, when they got close to various places, and they were still looking up from those claustrophobic conditions that they lived. That's what drives me. How can somebody work that long and that hard in a cotton field? And I tried it in Louisiana, and it's almost impossible. My wife tells me, say, come on out of that sun. Let that stuff alone. Come on inside. Drink some water. Do something better than that. And I told her, it's my mission. It's the life of the slave that drives me. Their lives need to be brought known to knowledge of men and schools and institutions everywhere. So that's why I'm so thankful for this day, thankful for what's going on here at Kohler, the people that I've met, that we've had wonderful times since I've been here, and the commitment from the people that came with me. This gentleman here, I want him to stand. Reuben Fellows is the person that helps that museum in every way. Every way. He's a dynamic.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. But I am very excited to also introduce to Fred Scruton, who has been working with Dr. Smith and also very, very, in an incredibly committed manner, spending weeks on end documenting Dr. Smith's site. It's so incredibly important for, first of all, high level, really, really fine photo documentation to be done of any and every site, but to have it done often and regularly and in great depth for this site, which changes all the time, is really, really important. So Fred, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for inviting me. And after two completely impossible acts to follow, I'm just going to read from my paper here, so it's going to be a little bit of a letdown. Okay, so I'd like to talk about how acceptable practices of what constitutes documentation in photojournalism and fine art photography have diverged in recent decades. Although the ethics of photojournalism don't address artificial lighting, Shelby Lee Adams expanded fine art conventions for documentary photography, largely through the overt use of electronic flash to dramatically separate his subjects from the background. That is, going against traditional documentary preferences for the available light look. Also, this particular picture was controversial because it was completely set up for the camera. based mostly on the photographer's recollection of past events and different people. Definitely not a record of something that happens spontaneously in real time. This was taken at night with the available environmental light plus a spot flash I added on Dr. Smith. And he was extremely patient sitting out there in the night for a long time. Back in the 50s, here is O. Winston Link's most famous photograph. Everything we're looking at, except the plane on the drive-in screen, which was literally cut and pasted in later, was lit with a single burst of his multiple flashbulb arrays. Here, the warm light on the figures came from my flash. My personal preference is to create light that looks plausibly like it might have come from the surrounding environment, such as a light bulb hanging in Martin Luther King's jail cell or one of the spotlights Billy Tripp has installed throughout the minefield. The picture on the left is primarily lit with my studio-type flashes. When I use the artificial lights, I personally try to keep the quality of light, I personally try to create a quality of light that looks fairly natural. In this case, as much as possible like the plain overcast sunlight we see on the right. Interior portraits like these can't really be done well without using the studio flashes. But again, I try to make the lighting look natural, not too much like studio lighting, which to my preferences would be a distraction from a more reality-based documentary look. So unfortunately, I just can't quite bring myself to give Miss Juanita the glamour lighting treatment she so richly deserves. I make a lot of use of the available artificial lighting in the environment, such as street lights, security lights, porch lights, and so forth. The next few slides will compare daylight exposures of similar scenes to dusk or nighttime exposures. This is an available light dusk shot. I didn't add any light on any of these, and there is minimal Photoshop work done on the color and contrast as well. The dusk sky just becomes that dark as the night sky sets in. From my point of view, daylight or nighttime lighting just document, quote unquote, different aspects of the site, but the night shots are often more visually dramatic. It might not look it, but the picture on the left was taken at night under the security light from the street in front of Dr. Smith's property. You probably didn't expect when I first showed up that Mary would be looking out the window late that night saying something like, "He's still out there in the dark with his camera." And then I was right back the next morning and night, and then you knew I was never going to go away. I think the nighttime lighting on the left gives the emotional impact of the work a little more extra punch. The typically darker backgrounds in the nighttime shots, this time on the right, help the sculptures make a stronger visual impression, often separating them from the background in a visually similar way to Shelby Lee Adams's use of daytime flash we saw previously. The night shot is on the right. On the left is a good example of Dr. Smith's narrative creating the picture. On slave ships, the chained males were purposely taunted by the sight of bound but partly exposed young girls. So I took that picture from a camera position showing their lips almost but never able to meet, but also showing an arc of emotional connection between their heads in the background. So the idea for the picture came, oops, I'm on the wrong picture. So the idea for the picture on the left came from Dr. Smith and helping me understand what his narrative is all about. Another example, here in the daylight picture on the left, Dr. Smith told me that the aquamarine colored light, the aquamarine colored eyes represent the reflection of the Atlantic Ocean in the eyes of a slave being brought briefly up on deck during the middle passage. The North Star on the right, symbolizing the Great Migration, makes a stronger impression against the almost dark sky. In a site like Dr. Smith's, I'm always struggling to keep the background from being too much of a visual jumble that distracts from the individual sculptures. The nighttime approach often helps integrate the background into the composition more successfully. Here on the right, the nighttime shot documents the impressionistic leaf shadows from a street light and shows another aspect and impression of the site. Going back to Dr. Smith's site, 3 years in a row, of course, provided great new photo ops each time. I'm usually not inclined to recreate previous year's shots to document the changes, but some comparisons always result. It's a Wizard of Oz joke. The horse of a different color? Okay. Photojournalists distinguish between posed portraits and reportage, but posed portraiture, of course, has a long tradition in fine art documentation. Back in the 30s, for example, the big tripod-bound cameras made frozen moment grab shots impossible. Everything had to be posed. These are examples of pictures suggested by Dr. Smith, another great result of documentary collaboration. And these are chosen by Raw Vision for the article on Dr. Smith. Also, without his direction, I would have never seen or photographed the sign or the cemetery with the unnamed slave boy marker, and they are central to the history of his Hammond site. Here, Dr. Smith let me photograph while he was really working on that same slave boy, whom he has essentially resurrected as a civic monument. That helped me include more candid, unposed type portraits into the overall project. While I was photographing the site, Dr. Smith just came out to work on the symbolic Niger River running along his property. Of course, I stopped what I was doing to get some more candid picture opportunities. But soon after that, we set up this group shot for the camera. Again, on the left, he's working on the piece with no direction from me, and an unplanned, but I think semi-posed portrait. I think you knew I was there with the camera on the right. This is from a New York Times blog by filmmaker Earl Morris. In 2011, he published a book called Believing is Seeing, where he discussed many of the issues surrounding truth in photography. Apparently, there was controversy and disappointment among historians that Walker Evans likely placed or repositioned the alarm clock on the mantle and probably moved the rocking chair into a pool of window light. A couple more historical examples. Roger Fenton apparently rolled more cannonballs onto the pathway. Arthur Rothstein carried the deer skull to different locations, and Alexander Gardner used his own rifle as a prop and posed the dead soldier. So, Kelly, I'm here to acknowledge that I sometimes move the clock, the skull, or the zombie babies. And did you get a picture of Jeannie? Oh, thank you. Okay. Keno Espinosa and I have a yearly tradition of reshooting his living room shrine, basically until I finally get it right, which of course means we'll never stop. But things move around, he adds flowers. We both move things around. He adds flowers, lights candles, and so forth, until each year we create the best picture of it we can. Being an outdoor working studio in flux, Dr. Smith's site will always contain a certain amount of scrap materials and debris. And of course, he wants things to be cleaned up for the photos, just like when the photographer from Architectural Digest comes over to photograph your house. Everyone gets out the vacuum cleaners, organizes the clutter, puts fresh flowers in the vases, or for Dr. Smith, into the arms of Mary, the African queen. Here, not only was clutter removed, but I moved the sculptures around to avoid edge mergers or tangents. I deleted earlier versions from my archive, but initially when I looked at the unedited slideshow, several of the figures would jitterbug around as a result of incremental changes I made to their positions. This picture idea came entirely from Dr. Smith. He wanted to make an historical statement about the sacrifice of veterans, including all the way back to the Civil War. And a few pages of his government printouts listing black veterans killed in Vietnam is displayed in front. So this was in no way a document of something I found at the site. This was temporarily created for the camera. I think of this as part of our collaboration. And once you're collaborating with someone, by definition, you're giving up the objective viewpoint of a photojournalist as a detached observer. Our goal becomes making the best pictures of the site we can to our mutual benefit. But of course, the untampered with photographic artifact, which I certainly understand the value of, is sometimes sacrificed in the process. Quite understandably, historians might prefer the certainty of forensic type photography, where a slight change to the evidence is found might lead to a false conclusion. I'll finish up with one of my personal favorite pictures from Dr. Smith's site. For this picture, I cleared out a fair amount of debris, and I also brought, I think it was 3 of the heads into the frame from other parts of the site. Bringing something into the frame is unusual for me, and I generally try to avoid it. But if you've ever visited this site in person, which I highly recommend, you pass a parade of severed slave heads while you're walking along the front, but a still camera is limited to one single viewpoint of 3-dimensional space. And I just felt a stronger, more representative picture of the emotion and narrative of Dr. Smith's site could be created with some additions to the frame. Although it's certainly less true to pure physical forensic documentation, I think those changes actually resulted in a superior document of what it feels like to be in Dr. Smith's face. In Dr. Smith's space. I wouldn't dream of being in Dr. Smith's face.
That's a great ending note.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred, and thanks for all your hard work there. Don't stop going there and photographing. He will not throw you out, I guarantee. I'm very excited to introduce Janine Whitfield, who I think is one of the most inspired, tenacious, and creative people working in arts administration, which at times can sound like a clinical term. In Janine's world, it's being in the trenches. And from being introduced to the work that Tyree Guyton was doing about 30 years ago, when she kind of thought it didn't quite look like art, which is captured for everyone to see in the documentary video, Come Unto Me, The World of the Faces of Tyree Guyton. She's been working for 30 years and has changed many, many lives and kept the site going through lots of hardship, many successes, and now something brand new.
Well, good evening or afternoon. Thank you to Ruth Kohler. I've seen so many friends here. I know I'm cute. I'm just joking. No, I'm just saying I was back here in the 90s, and it's just so amazing to see so many people that I knew. And so thank you, and thank you, Lisa, for having me, and my brother, Dr. Charles Smith. So let me just start off by saying that, yes, I am not, unlike some of my other colleagues, I did not get involved in this work because it fascinated me. I got involved purely by accident. I was climbing the corporate ladder and doing things as a young African-American woman that everybody thought I should be doing, and then I met Tyree Guyton. And so I want to start off by just this beautiful quote, and because it's so true, and it has really turned out to be true for the Heidelberg Project in Detroit. But it started with one man and his grandfather. And Tyree actually started the Heidelberg Project on the street that he was born and raised on. The Heidelberg Project sits on Heidelberg Street, and Sam Mackey was his partner in crime when they first began. But what we were up against became the impetus or the reason for such an animal as the Heidelberg Project in the first place. 48207 was recognized as the third poorest zip code in the country, not just in the city of Detroit. And these were the statistics that we were up against. When I think about that 55% African American male mortality rate. I want to tell you what that translates into. Young men between the ages of 14 and 28 have only a 45% chance of escaping death or jail in this particular community that we're working in. And the conditions really have not gotten much better. So this became the reason, as Dr. Smith said, the Heidelberg Project was born out of a need that was existing in that community. Won't read the vision statement, but this is our belief that we can literally rebuild our communities and our cities by using the culture of that city, of that particular community. So, what did he do? This is the street that I turned down in 1993. And I rolled down my window. Unbeknownst to me, the artist was sitting on the curb. And I literally said to him, "What in the hell is all of this?" And I just want you to know that although I had been to museums as a little girl and I had experienced art, I always thought about art as something that was unapproachable, something that you could not touch, something that was off limits to me. And what Tyree said he had done is created a living art museum in the heart of in an urban community. And we took to kindly calling it our own ghetto Guggenheim. So when I tell you this man took over the whole block, he literally took over the entire street. Now you're looking at the Heidelberg Project in approximately 2000 right now, so you're gonna see some changes as we go along. But when I got involved with the project, what I realized is that here was a man, as an artist, and as that beautiful definition that this gentleman gave for a visionary, it is so true. They literally build a house without a foundation. And I think sometimes I'm not so sure we should require much more of them, because I think that what they're contributing is so big, but then we have a tendency of wanting them to know how to do all kinds of other things, like give lectures or market what they've done. And I think that what they give us is the greatest gift, and we have to surround them with the resources to help them accomplish what they're trying to do, and that's where I stepped in. So what have we experienced? Well, the city of Detroit didn't like it. That's for damn sure. So we experienced bulldozers. Tyree started the Heidelberg Project in 1986, and by 1991, he had literally created 4 installations from these abandoned houses on the block. And so this particular structure was bulldozed by the city of Detroit. We've also experienced fires. So we had a demolition by the city of Detroit in 1991. I joined the project in 1993. We began rebuilding. It came back stronger than before, and we had another demolition by the city of Detroit in 1999. Now, just think about this. We're literally outliving the administrations in the city of Detroit. So we're building again after the 1999 demolition, and I mean, we had literally, the city put a counter on the street to determine if the amount of traffic on that street was reasonable. And that is how we were able to learn that we had become the 3rd most visited cultural destination in the city of Detroit, because the city put a counter on the street. So I think after the city bulldozed us twice, they thought, well, we don't really know what to make of this. Maybe we'll just leave you alone. We're not gonna help you, but we'll leave you alone. Unfortunately, in 2013, someone decided to strike a match. Now, what's interesting is that now we are educating in the community. Children are growing up with this work. And when the first person struck a match, we knew that it was a kid in the area. But then that person must have lit a fire under someone else, because we experienced a total of 12 fires from 2013 through 2014. See? So you see the creations that were created by Tyree literally destroyed. Now, the reason why we know that it wasn't the same person that set the first fire is because they used an accelerant. So as soon as the match was lit, it just went up in flames. We went through that, guys, when, kid you not, 12 times, and we lost 6 prominent installations. Now, the reason there were 12 fires, but we only lost 6 installations was because the matches were set, or the fires were sometimes set twice to completely level the structure. So what did we learn from that? Well, my goodness, I mean, you know, this project has literally become my life. And when I talk about what we have experienced and the amount of people that have been to this site, I'm talking 200,000 people annually. There are 195 or 96 countries in the world, and visitors from 144 have signed our guest books. So you can imagine that we have learned and gathered a lot. This work is so messy. It is not clean. And when we talk about making a place, or we talk about creative placemaking, I want to just say that each and every place has to consider its own environment and its own culture, its own political structure, its own everything. No 2 places will ever be alike, but there are some real commonalities. This was the most compelling argument. From what we had done, Williams College conducted an economic impact study on our work and learned that we had contributed $3.2 million to the Wayne County region and $2.7 million to the immediate community. Now the new administration is starting to listen. Now they're starting to see the economic tourism with the work of the Heidelberg Project. So we decided to take it further, and we coined our own phrase, Heidelbergology. Not only did we coin it, we also trademarked it, so we gave a definition to our work. And the concept of what we have done, this is exactly what we've learned. This is what our work has taught us. Abstract advocacy. Now, I know that sounds abstract, but it's very simple. What we learned, now that's what I want, that's the train of thought that I'm on. What we've learned is that in the short term, new information changes attitudes, and in the long term, it changes behavior. And then we gave definitions, or 3 core practices that we pulled out of that. Art as a medicine, art as a catalyst for change, and of course, the first one I just shared with you. Now let me give you an example of this changing attitudes and then changing behaviors. Mrs. Bell was someone who steadfastly, dogmatically hated the Heidelberg Project, and until she found a way to capitalize for herself. And that was exactly what Tyree wanted. He wanted people to use the art as a way to think again, as a way to learn how to create again. And as a result of that, it took 25 years, but now the Yellow House is known as the Yellow Guest Book House on Heidelberg Street today. Let's talk a little bit about how it changes art as a medicine. Justin grew up with the project. He is a little boy that literally was raised on that street. He comes from 3 generations of drug abusers. But today, Justin has graduated from Central Michigan University, and when he was asked what was his inspiration, he talked about how the Heidelberg Project helped him to understand that he had choices. Art is medicine. Well, we get a lot of people that come from the jails, or they can't get, what do they call it, trying to get them rehabilitated back into the community. Well, a lot of these guys have grown up in the neighborhood where Tyree lives, and they read about him in jail, and so Tyree will give them a job. So we're also contributing to the community and giving people another opportunity through this work. And we're building bridges and dispelling myths. If some of you have not heard, Detroit still historically is one of the most segregated cities in the country, and yet we have something like 95 different cultures in the city of Detroit. Heidelberg was one that began to build bridges, and so we began to build these bridges with people from all over the country and the world. That's the new face of the Heidelberg Project, Dottie Waddy House. That is where it all began. That is where Grandpa Mackey gave Tyree a paintbrush. And that is where the artist's mother lives, who just passed on Monday. So yeah, the Dottie Waddy House. And so now this will become, no doubt, our museum for the Heidelberg Project. So I want to move quickly now and talk to you now after 31 years. Where are we going now? We have become a community anchor. We have become recognized by our city. And so as we look at what's changing now after the fires, we are now looking at how we capitalize on all of the people that come to the Heidelberg Project. And so one of the things that Tyree talked about is it's time to retire. I've given 31 years of my life to the city of Detroit and to provide this free museum. So what's going to happen now? So he says to me, you happen. You take over. And made me the CEO of the Heidelberg Project. And so what I did is I went and found me some more women. And I did. I found me some more women of all races, Arab American, African American, Jewish American, you name it, because Heidelberg, the symbolism with all the dots is about celebrating all races of people. That is what we care about, and that is what we're trying to demonstrate in our community. So I am happy to share publicly for the first time that one of my first moves after hiring 4 new women on my board of directors was that we have entered into a contract partnership agreement with the city of Detroit to now finally move the Heidelberg Project forward in a new way, of course, with the same funk, raw grit. It's a little scary thinking about the city getting on board because, you know, they have a way of kind of messing up things. But I am confident that we will take the project to the next level and that this fight has definitely been worth it. But what's next for Tyree? Well, you know, he's doing other things. He's being called to your city of Philadelphia. And I have, and places like China. So this was one of the houses he did in Shenzhen at the Shenzhen Biennale. Yeah, and then, so this is the beginning stages of it, and it starts to take on shape and form much like his drawing that he created. And then also Cleveland Museum of Art. So his famous clocks now that were on Heidelberg Street are now adorning different museums and galleries. We're reaching out, we're trying to house some of the original work from the first 31 years. And this is his biggest project to date. This is the Times. He calls it the Times Project, and it is in Philadelphia. And it doesn't look anything like that right now, but let's see if we can have him talk a little bit about it just really quickly.
I want to work in conjunction with the community. I believe it must be a win-win situation. My name is Tyree Gayden, and I'm an artist from the city of Detroit, Michigan. What time is it? In the writings of Plato, Plato says that time is the moving image of reality, so I'm going to create a new reality now. I believe it's going to take me places I've never been before. So I came here with an open mind to learn. And together, myself, along with the community, we're going to create something incredible.
Thank you.
So thank you all. That was really inspiring, exciting, and I am so glad that we've been able to hear from 3 sets of people who are doing really, really ambitious projects for many decades in urban areas. And in the last couple of the sessions this morning were clipped and didn't allow for audience questions. I have a whole bunch that I'm not going to ask, and instead turn it over to the audience or to anyone here on the panel if you'd like to ask questions of each other.
This is for Isaiah. When you redid the arches, are those doors or just sealed now? With the arches, when you did the metal designs, did they get sealed?
Those are not doors.
They're not doors. They're sealed. And that's all.
They're ironwork. So
it's an open lattice.
yeah, they're not doors. Yeah.
It's an open lattice. But there are examples that we have done of openings where just the inside edge has a frame, and then the top has design. But it's interesting to note that the design that what's called a design, I don't think of a design I call it just my history of knowledge of what I am about and my autobiography of knowledge, and I just draw. And I don't make changes in it because, as I said, I believe that I do not know what I am doing because I'm doing it for the future. I would paraphrase that in saying that it's different than rethinking things. It's like jazz. You go for it and you accept what you do and accept that you don't know.
I guess I have the mic, so I got to speak. Jane from Chicago. Thank you so much for being inspirational and talking so much about resilience and like years and years and years of keeping on. I'm so grateful to all of you. It's been an amazing panel. I mean, I have some nuts and bolts questions because I'm an artist. Like, what do you do with all the Mexican stuff that's porous to keep it not going away? But I could ask Stacy later, I guess. Yeah, okay.
Well, actually, we're sort of figuring that out, but a lot of the concepts, what we're working with now is that it doesn't matter, that we can replace the work. If Isaiah is alive still, we can just, if it falls off, if it rots, if it breaks, we can just replace it with something new. So we're experimenting with that still.
Okay.
I'd like to say something to that, too. The artist is not required to or responsible for that thing called the future.
Upkeep.
And so, I think that in my work, having done all of these mosaic murals all over the city, if the city, the state, the nation, the world decides that they're important to save, then it provides all kinds of work for people in the future.
Yeah.
And adding to that, there are 25 people that work for the garden, and 6 of them have health care, including dental care.
How did you do that?
8 have dental care, and Julia and I don't have dental care. Well, I could hardly speak now.
More about that later. Is that because the city funds it?
What?
The city funds it then?
No,
Is
the city has
healthcare?
nothing to. The city has
it's a foundation. Okay.
the only thing the city has done is to make it difficult for us to do what we do.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
Like so many cities.
75% of our budget is from earned revenue, which is ticket sales. So we get all of our money through ticket sales.
Hey, Isaiah. Since you're thinking always about moving forward with your work and what's coming next, not what happened in the past, does it make you crazy to have to go back and restore components that have been damaged?
Well, that's what the Magic Garden is doing.
But they're making you do some of it, right?
Well, they don't make me do some of it. I enjoy doing. It's not a problem. It's not a problem. And there's something else that should be said about that. There are 3 people that work in preservation. I have taught them my methods, but I've also taught them my freedoms, so that I can come into the garden and see places that are not mine, that are theirs, that they have done, and I can tell them I like them. I'm not always honest about that.
Yeah.
I hope you have a question for someone else.
I do. Hi, Jen Jameson with the Rhinestone Cowboy Project, etc. But my question is for Dr. Smith. Dr. Smith, you created a site outside of Chicago, and then over time you ended up creating a site outside of New Orleans. And I just sort of wanted to know if you could speak to that process of localizing. Like, what was the process? How was the process different creating a site in the North versus in the South? I mean, the Deep South. Can you tell us about how the Hammond site tells the story of the South, or does it tell a broader story?
Dr. Smith's, in a nutshell, site in Aurora, he came into an agreement in 1999, I think, with Kohler Foundation to remove and preserve about 600 works, which were brought to Kohler, preserved, and gifted to major museums around the country. This is a large body of work, with the Kohler Art Center receiving the core collection. And Dr. Smith immediately went to work changing and revising and refreshing and expressing at the Aurora site. And now I'm going to ask you to explain what happened in Hammond, if you would. He was going to either New Orleans or returning, stopped in Hammond, which is north of Lake Pontchartrain, for something to eat, and saw.
My situation in Hammond started, I was on my way to New Orleans to deal with my mother. I had to make that trip almost 2, maybe 3 times a month to check on her, because she was in the stages of Alzheimer's, and we could never be really sure what her situation was, because family members is just family members by name. They're not there really by love, so they wouldn't necessarily have the concerns that you would think they should have. So I would drive back and forth, on the distance from Aurora, Illinois to New Orleans, 926 miles, 2-3 times a month. So the traveling was no problem for me. But once I was on the move, I was going to New Orleans, and I decided I'd stop and get some gas and have lunch at this next stop, which was Hammond, Louisiana. And when I stopped at the restaurant, I'd asked the young lady that was waiting on the table, I said, "Excuse me, do you have any African-American history museums or cultural sites in the area?" And she said, "No, I don't think, no, it's not one." And the guy that was on the grill in the back, he heard the conversation, and he said, "Oh, well, what about, where that boy fell out that tree? Well, the slave." And then when he said the slave, that perked my ears up to hear more what he's saying. And if you ever been in the South asking for direction or information or any history, that's the most oddest problem or discussion you'll ever run into. And I said, "Well, wait a minute, what did you say? He fell out the tree and he a slave?" And he said, yeah, it's down, it's over, down that way. And so I began to inquire about what he was saying, and someone finally told me that he's talking about the founder's grave on Charles Street, east of City Hall. And I finally found what he was talking about, and it's a beautiful brochure Kohler has put together out there that explains it real well. And the sign is a mark about a state. It says, "Here lies Pete Hammond, his wife, and 3 daughters and favorite slave boy." And I said, "Whoa, that shit, that ain't coming out right." I know back in the day, you can be 80 years old, you still a boy. And was it a boy, a man, or what? So I began to inquire about it. I saw a regular route mailman. I said, "Hey, brother, this sign here and the boy on that, do you have any information on him, his family, where they lived, and any history about him?" He said, "No, I really don't know." So I went on from there and began to go into the various areas of downtown in the business area to try and find out what's about this slave boy and why there's no information about him for inquiry for visitors and travelers and tourists and whatever. Because right now, the way it looks to me, it's a perfect insult to have something like that as a state marker and no information about him. So I went around and around the Chamber of Commerce, downtown development, and all of the places you would think that information would readily be, and nothing happened. So I finally cut in. I said, well, what I'll do is I'll check in at the Holiday Inn, stay overnight, and get up in the morning and find out with a better direction. And the first stop I said I'll make the stop to the mayor's office. And I went to the mayor's office and I shared with him who I was, what my purpose was, what my mission is. And I told him, I said, that site needs to be clarified, and it needs to have information as a marker what's happening in Hammond and with that family and so forth. He said, well, I don't know why they haven't done anything with that. What you have to do is go over to Southeastern College and ask Dr. Hyde. I said, wait a minute, you mean to tell me if I'm traveling, I have to wait till the college is open to go and find out about a permanent marker that you have here about an African-American laying in the ground with a marker saying unnamed slave boy, to you and to me? Does that make sense to you? He said, well, I don't know how it makes sense to you, but it's been there a long time. And I said, well, what's the population of the African-Americans here? He said, well, they're about 30%. I said, that's too many to have that situation like that. He said, but they're trying to build a museum at the old colored school. Mr. Perkins is dealing with that. And I got involved with him after I met him and shared with him what it takes to build a museum, what it takes to bring people to the town, and what it takes to create jobs and all of the things that work. And I shared that with the leaders, the politicians, and all of those involved that would have something to say about it. And I went to them individually, one by one, to break up organized resistance so they won't stick together against me. And I went at them, and I was telling them the importance of our culture and our history and how we built Louisiana and how we built this country with cotton, our backs, our blood, our sweat, the dream of our slaves having the hope for our future. And they finally said, well, you're right. And they finally dealt with them and gave them the money, the outlay money, and I told them, well, just give me $100,000 for my time, for my services, because I'm going to put some art there, because that art is what's going to bring them there. And I bought about 20 pieces there, and I showed the politicians, this is what people look for. They're looking for art of your culture and so forth. It works in Illinois, it'll work here. As that moved forward, they got better and better. And next thing, my wife started telling me, said, you know, they're having meetings at that museum and they're not saying anything to you. And I said, wonder what's happening. So what had happened, they had got the money to open the museum and start building on it, and they had just cut me out. And then I said, that's the lowest form of life there is. You know, I came to help, and yet they done trample on me like that. So I didn't want to fight them in the public, and I still don't. But I know it's going to change because it's wrong, and God don't bless nothing when you step on somebody to get where you going, to trust them and leave them like that. So that's the story of Hammond, and that's how that house got built there. Because I didn't go there to build a museum, but I knew when they treated me like that, the next step was going to be, you got a museum.
Yeah. Beautiful, thank you.
So I have one more question. Thank you, Dr. Smith. It's continually amazing to me to think about what I do in my life or what kinds of things will make me change radically and dramatically. So far, nothing. But, you know, for someone to drive, see something that is so wrong, and then move down and just totally commit to do what he did in Aurora all over again is rare. Janine, I would like to ask you a question. I know that you've said in a press release that when you start Heidelberg 3.0, that Tyree will be pretty much moving away from the project and into the studio, which I think is tremendous, and man, did he earn it. Yeah. And I'm really thrilled to hear that you got some women. Can you talk just a little bit, I think we're maybe running out of time, but just about what that change will mean and where you're going to take it?
Sure. So Heidelberg 3.0 is really nothing more than the vision that Tyree has already had. It's really just that simple. So our vision is to take the houses that were lost in the fire, redevelop them. And I want you to just imagine the House of Soul was a house covered in record albums. So that will become a new structure, probably made from found and recycled materials with new visionaries, but it's still Tyree's vision, if you can understand what I'm saying. And the concept is that not only will it be visually stimulating on the outside, but when you step on the inside, that will be teaching music. the house of poetry, the house of words, you know, on the outside and on the inside, the spoken word. That's always been our vision since 1995, is that these art houses could serve a useful function and purpose in the community and also create a new economic engine for the community. And we're proving that and demonstrating that. So all we're doing, Lisa, is instituting the vision that the artist has had and give him a break and let him have a little fun and enjoy his life some. That's it.